Welcome, everyone, to the Latin American panel, part of the UAE Virtual Energy Forum, where we've gone around the world in one day, gathering insights on the direction of the energy sector for the year ahead. We started in Asia. From there, we went through the Middle East and Europe, and now finally, we've landed in the Americas. On this panel, we'll be discussing Latin America's recent leftist turn, which can be seen everywhere from the Rio Grande down to the Patagonia, and how this leftist turn could impact the region's energy approach for the year. I have with me Dr. Aldo Flores Quiroga, former Deputy Secretary for Hydrocarbons at Mexico's Ministry of Energy, and he's also a visiting professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin. And we also have with us Jose Shalhoub, political risk and oil analyst based out of Venezuela. Welcome both, and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to kick it off. Thank you. I wanted to kick it off by giving a little bit of context on the region and big events that have been happening the past couple of days, particularly in Brazil. Bolsonaro is out, Lula is in, and 1,000 of Bolsonaro's protesters are also in. They invaded the Brazilian federal government's most important buildings, and over 1,000 of them have been arrested so far. So given that backdrop and on everything that's been happening in the region, particularly in the last couple of days, I wanted to kick it off by asking, what's the biggest geopolitical variable in Latin America for 2023? And Jose, we can kick it off with your take.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And it's an honor and privilege for me to be with this top-notch panelists worldwide. Well, yeah, and certainly what's been unfolding in Brazil starting 2023, it's one of the biggest geopolitical variables in Latin America, since we're dealing with the biggest economy in the region, one of the biggest commodities producers and exporters in the region. As for example, Brazil has seen its oil production growing despite the past year's corruption cases impacting Petrobras, for example. But yes, I believe that that's the biggest geopolitical challenge, because it also involves one of the key members of the BRICS bloc as well. So it will definitely impact the geopolitical and the economics dynamics in the region. Also, I wanted to highlight what's been unfolding in Guyana in terms of talking about the new kid on the block in the region, as Guyana has seen since 2015 its oil production surging after the first discoveries of research by Exxon and Hess Corporation. So those countries for me are the two key geopolitical game changers in the region if you mix them with commodities and oil gas landscape.
Absolutely, Brazil, and for sure, and then Guyana, potential wild card that's in the mix. Sticking with Brazil a little bit more, Dr. Flores Quiroga, I wanted to ask you, this is Lula's second turn at the presidency. He was already a two-term president before at the beginning of the 2000s, and even though he initially spooked investors with his initial election, those worries were quelled as he enters his presidency, and he was able to ride a huge commodities boom in the years that he was president that was coming out of primarily China, and that helped to create a rising tide that lifted all Brazilian boats. But now, fast forward to 2023, when he's becoming president again, fresh out of jail time, what is your expectation for his presidency? Do you think it'll be similar to the one that happened the first time around, where there was this commodities boom that really helped him and really helped Brazil?
Well, I don't know about the commodities boom. This will obviously depend on the evolution of the global economy. We have still today very contrasting currents and perspectives on what might happen to global economic growth, and that will have an impact on demand for commodities, and therefore on some of the opportunities for prosperity in Brazil and the whole Latin American region that is so focused on exporting commodities and raw materials. But thinking more closely on Brazil and this transition, what we can expect is a Brazil that will be a Brazilian president that will be pragmatic within the orientation that he has already announced he wants for the Brazilian energy industry. Pragmatism means that there's progress that has been made in the Brazilian oil industry that will not by any means be discarded. But there will be some reorientation in terms of the broader energy policy that will be relevant for the future, mostly of retail and downstream markets, not so much upstream markets. Some of the key reforms that were so controversial at some point having to do with domestic content requirements for the industry, I think have been very much processed. But we can expect more action with respect to the social agenda. Some delay in the ongoing delay in the program to realign domestic prices to global international prices and the like. So that's going to be one part of the story. Some legacy pragmatism with some new emphasis on the social agenda, plus, of course, this retaking of the agenda, the environmental agenda, with already important announcements regarding the protection of the Amazon forest and renewable energies. So this is something that will also be conditioning some Brazilian policy. And one more thing that will be relevant to political developments in the whole region. Implicit in what I have said is inequality, but also the availability of water. And you mentioned previously the corruption scandal, the Lava Jato. So corruption, water, inequality, and one might add organized crime are all segments or components of a political stew or equation.
Definitely.
It will be very difficult for the region.
Definitely. Lula's social program gets a lot of headlines, and that's definitely a pretty core focus of what he campaigned on. And it'll also be, I'm sure, impacted by regional developments, and that calculus comes into play as well, like you mentioned. So beyond Brazil, there's Mercosur, which is a regional trade bloc that Brazil is a founding member of. And then right next door to Brazil, as Jose mentioned before, we have this potential wild card of Guyana, where it's a tiny country. Nobody ever really talks about it that much on the international arena, but their economy is expected to have grown by potentially over 50% in 2022, which would have made it the largest growth on the planet due to recent discoveries of oil deposits in the country. Jose, does Guyana have the potential to become a top-tier oil producer?
Yeah, well, I've been kind of studying Guyana recently because first of all, it's close to Venezuela, the country where I'm based in. It represents a competition. Sadly, Venezuela, it's in a condition that everyone knows about it. Right now, Guyana is closed 2022, producing around 375,000 barrels per day, which is astonishing. It has reserves. Exxon has, and the Chinese companies are discovering more and more reserves. The government of Guyana is offering more and more blocks for bidding. Yes, I believe that Guyana, of course, the biggest challenge for Guyana, as for any other country that finds itself with this sudden oil reserves and riches, and for a country that has less than 1 million of people living there, the biggest challenge is, of course, creating a serious and consolidated legal framework that could seriously capitalize and avoid the always known Dutch disease that so heavily impacted, for example, again, I mentioned the case of Venezuela, of course, I mean, when you these types of oil riches, if you don't handle it properly, and for such a country that as Guyana, such a small country, that for me is the biggest challenge. But yeah, Guyana is the promise of South America. OPEC has been mentioning of Guyana for this year, and you know, in the organization latest reports, the monthly reports, as one of the only spots of growing production for this year. So that's really important. That's considerable.
Right. So Guyana has this huge potential to go up and up and up. Brazil is already a top player. Meanwhile, Mexico's oil production has declined 37% from its peak, and Venezuela's has declined a whopping 82% from its peak. Recently, in the past couple of weeks, though, there have been some developments that might reverse that trend. For example, Chevron's reintroduction to the country, and Pemex in Mexico relying on government support. Dr. Flores Quiroga, do you see that reversal happening in 2023 and production going up from Venezuela and Mexico?
No, for the Mexican case specifically, we can expect more of the same. The government has made, and Pemex, a very strong effort to increase production. Their success so far has been mainly to stabilize production and increase it only slightly. Much more investment is needed in order to bring production up, and much more investment is needed in Venezuela to return to levels of production that we saw before. These are two cases in which it's not geology, but what happens above ground that determines very much the fate of production in the two countries
Definitely.
that have been the oil countries of the region.
Definitely. And that kind of the part of what's helped Brazil and part of what's helped Petrobras, in spite of Lava Jato, in spite of all these other scandals that have been happening, are partnerships with oil majors, with international super majors that enter Brazil and provide foreign investment and foreign partnerships upstream or downstream with national oil companies like Petrobras. And Chevron's reintroduction, it seems like that could be happening in Venezuela again, potentially, coming from the Americans. Are there any geopolitical or economic implications of Chevron's reintroduction to Venezuela, or is that so minor that it's not really, it's not really going to be on the horizon for the year? Jose, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of premature. It's kind of early to tell because it deals with the recent license, a new license given by the U.S. government, the OFAC, to Chevron to re-enter the country and to restart existing production here, not dealing with new investments in new production. It's very telling that recently, in the recent days, Chevron has started a new recruitment process here in Venezuela in different locations, looking for new personnel. It named a new management authorities here, which is really revealing on the on the medium and long-term plans that Chevron may have for Venezuela in the next 6 months. This recent license will last for 6 months. Let's see what happens after this new license expires. For me, this could, I mean, in terms of geopolitical implications, as this new license stated, no deals with Russian entities, would have to exist with the Venezuelan government. So definitely that's the geopolitical implications that I see. And the Venezuelan government will need to calibrate the Maduro recently named a new PDVSA head. So that's kind of another item to add in this new, kind of chess game and chess moves that the government is trying to do by trying to kind of move ahead, further ahead, and trying to get more sanctions lifted by the U.S. government in terms of to get new investments from Chevron and who knows, maybe another U.S. oil company.
Right, and bringing in Russia to the conversation is very interesting because it's not just Chevron, it's not just the U.S. that's looking at Venezuela, but Russia's on the prowl all over the world, not just in Ukraine, but it's also looking to potentially enter these other regions and fill these capital and knowledge gaps, for example, in Venezuela, that have been created with this brain drain that has happened over the past, say, 20 years. So, Jose, you're saying that one of the expectations for the year is not to expect Russia trying to come in and fill in these gaps in Venezuela or in other countries in the region, and or do you see Russia trying to make gains in Latin America in 2023?
Well, I think Putin is concentrated right now in what he's trying or may try to do in Ukraine, in a war that it took longer than he expected. It's a stalemate in Ukraine. I believe that Russia still has influence in Venezuela, but not as much as it had during the former presidency of Hugo Chavez, in terms of oil presence here. Right after Chevron announced, this new license to restart operations here in Venezuela, the Russian government announced that it wanted to keep its and expand its oil deals with the Venezuelan government, but nothing more has come out of that announcement. So, it'll be crucial for the Maduro government now that recently the opposition stripped the power of the interim presidency of Juan Guaido. Although nobody knows what the U.S. is trying to do, as it still has the recognition of to the opposition, but not to Guaido. So yes, I think that the Russian presence here in Venezuela and in Latin America recently, also it was known that the Russian government, according to different reports, intervened for the victory of Gustavo Petro in Colombia. So that's critical as well for trying to elucidate the Russian influence in Latin America in 2023.
Absolutely. Colombia elected its first leftist president in 2022, who has, much like the US, begun to embrace Venezuela and reestablished diplomatic relations in a way that haven't been seen for several years. And it's not just Russia on the global stage. Dr. Flores Quiroga, when it comes to other global developments, China's overnight reopening and abandonment of COVID restrictions, or inflation, or questions surrounding the flow of Iranian oil on global markets, to what extent do you think developments outside the region will impact the direction that Latin America takes for the year?
Well, they will, but there's two ways to look at them. One is through the impact on global energy demand. Should China come back to growth after with the lifting of these restrictions, should we have a softer economic landing, then we can expect a stronger demand and therefore more purchases of oil from the Americas. That means Canada, the US, mostly Brazil and Guyana, maybe some extra oil that could come from Argentina. It's doubtful that it will be Mexico, very little, if any, from Venezuela. So that will be one impact. The other impact concerns the ongoing engagement and now increasingly contentious space for Chinese investment in the region. The geopolitical competition between the US and China has been mostly geoeconomic right now, but it is becoming a little bit hotter than we would expect. Chinese companies are investing in Latin America's energy sector. They are present from the Gulf of Mexico all the way down to Vaca Muerta, for example. So we can be, we should be paying attention to the development of these investments, the speed at which they increase, if they stagnate or not. This will have also an impact on the relationship between the Latin American countries and the United States, and that should have an impact as well on the development of the energy industry in general.
Right. So from the point of view of Latin America, it's not just the US that's going in there to mingle with the countries. And it's not just Russia, who's already preoccupied with a ton of other issues, but China investments in the region are expected to increase. We have a few minutes left, let's say 2 to 3 minutes left on the panel. And Jose, would you like to close it off with your take on perhaps the biggest development to keep an eye on outside the region that would impact Latin America in 2023?
Sure. As for Latin America being a top commodities exporting region, definitely the prices of commodities, which are projected to tend lower, at least for the next month of May, definitely that will impact the macroeconomics condition of the region. And second of all, there will be crucial elections in the region as well, such as in Argentina, Colombia, and Ecuador, that we should all be paying attention. In 2024, there will be elections in Venezuela as well. So definitely, and of course, Guyana, we should always be paying attention this year and the years to come.
Great. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thank you both. Thank you, Jose Shalhoub, and thank you, Dr. Aldo Flores Quiroga, for joining us today and for helping us navigate the landscape in Latin America in energy for the year 2023. And we hope to see you again soon. Thanks again.